They reached the campsite at first light, boots crunching over frost-stiffened leaf litter, breath silvering in the thin morning air. Two rangers, O'Keefe and Ramirez, moved in a quiet, practiced rhythm, the way people do when they've seen enough bad endings to recognize the shape of one before it fully arrives. The creek to their right made a brittle sound against the stones, a narrow voice trying not to be heard. Birds were absent, no chatter, no morning chorus. It was as if the forest had set its volume to zero out of respect or warning. The camp sat in a shallow bowl of pine and deadfall, 3 tents like punctuation marks at the edge of a blackened fire ring. A coffee tin steamed weakly beside the coals, as if the last person to touch it had stepped away only moments ago. The tin's lid lay face down in a patch of melted frost. Ramirez touched the side with a knuckle and frowned. "Still warm," he said. O'Keefe circled slowly, eyes taking in the banal and the strange in equal measure. A coil of paracord looped neatly over a branch. 3 enamel mugs in a row, their rims aligned. A 4th mug, on its side in the dirt, printing a half-moon near the fire ring, as if it had been set down and then nudged by an elbow. Boot prints layered and confused the ground. 3 distinct sizes, overlaying each other in the tight choreography of people who had lived shoulder to shoulder for a few days. But there was another pattern too. O'Keefe crouched and studied it, a wide oval of compacted duff, where feet had paced and paced and paced, a worry track worn into the earth. It orbited the camp, like a thought that refused to resolve. He straightened and looked at the middle tent, the olive one with the faint orange piping. The zipper sat closed at the bottom stop. There were no draglines, no wavy imprint where someone had lifted the flap to duck out, no second exit carved into the nylon with a knife. Just a seam you could play like a violin string with one finger. O'Keefe laid his palm on the door and felt the cold of the morning radiating through synthetic skin. He drew the zipper up 1 inch and stopped, listening for that particular music of teeth separating. The sound whispered across the clearing like a secret. Ramirez leaned in, the bodycam dot burning red. "Hold," Ramirez said, and tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Hearing that?" At first it was nothing. Then, under the river hush and the distant thrum of their own blood, another sound appeared. A soft, stale exhale from inside the tent as air equalized. Not a person. Just the space sighing. Still, they both felt it. How a tent announces absence with the same gravity as it announces presence. O'Keefe nodded once, continued the zip. The flap peeled back. Inside, a sleeping bag unrolled and smoothed flat as if it had been ironed with warm hands. A headlamp coiled like a resting snake on top of a paperback, whose cover bore the creases of time. A pair of socks folded into themselves at the foot of the pad, toes aligned. No debris. No frantic scatter from a night gone wrong. Just careful organization. Too careful. Ramirez crouched, gloved fingers hovering over the sleeping bag as if proximity alone could tell a story. "Zip from the inside," he said. "No tears, no cut seam." If he came out, he unzipped, then zipped it closed behind him without stepping on the bag, without disturbing. He stopped, because the details weren't cooperating. The zipper tab faced inward, the teeth were clean. The dirt at the threshold showed 1 set of tracks going in last night, none coming out. You don't ghost your way through nylon. O'Keefe took a slow look around the entire clearing, at the 2 other tents, at the fire, at the creek working its way through stone. He followed the ground story outward, scanning for a straight line of prints leading away. Instead, he found something worse. 2 sets of footprints, parallel at first, then curving in a hesitant ellipse around the perimeter of camp. The ellipses overlapped and overlapped again, narrowing, tightening, like 2 people walking circles around each other for hours. No drunken splay of feet. No panic. A ritual more than a search. At the far end of the track, the prints simply stopped. Not because the earth had hardened or the moss swallowed them, but because the prints finished a last, neat loop, and didn't continue. The duff beyond lay unbroken, A patient face. Ramirez swallowed and glanced at the coffee again, at the way the steam thinned and lifted. "Why walk in circles all night?" he said, not really to O'Keefe and not really to himself. The red bodycam dot glowed steady, a little eye recording everything. "And where does a man go?" he added softly, "from a tent zipped on the inside?" The forest did not answer. Cut there. Let the question hang like a rope over cold water. Then take the rope and hand it to me, because you wanted the real story. The part that doesn't make it into reports. 2 nights earlier, when everything still felt ordinary in that way, things feel ordinary an hour before a thunderstorm splits the sky. They arrived late afternoon with the particular optimism of people who have planned something down to the brand of coffee and the sequence in which the camp chairs unfold. Ethan drove. He always drove. Insurance in human form, a man who built redundancies into his redundancies. His Tacoma wore a film of dust like a good coat. He parked at a small pullout a half-mile short of the Pine Gate trailhead, because he didn't trust the ruts beyond. From the back seat, Sam stretched like a cat in an aeroplane seat and tossed a grin over the cooler lid. "This is the part where the banjo music starts," he said, stepping out. 1 to 10, how cursed are we? 2, Ethan said, scanning the tree line with a surveyor's gaze. "Maybe a 3 if we forget the water filter." 6, Nora said lightly, then kissed her own knuckles for luck. She did that when planes took off, and when stoves lit. A ritual almost invisible if you weren't looking for it. She flicked her headlamp strap against her wrist to feel it spring. Bad moon rising in 3 days. Forrest doesn't like crescents. David climbed out last. He wore quiet the way some men wear expensive watches. Dark hair, clean jaw, eyes that measured distance and put numbers to it. He hoisted a pack and buckled the sternum strap without looking down, a choreography learned long ago. When Sam shouldered his own pack and exaggerated a wobble, David's mouth twitched. "Trails 5.2, he said. "Elevation gains modest, creek runs cold year-round, you can hear it within the last half-mile." "How do you always know that?" Sam said. David shrugged one shoulder. "I read the maps." Ethan locked the truck and touched the hood twice, the way he did, once to confirm it was real, once for luck. They set off along a trail that began as a wide lane through scrub oak, and tightened into single track under high fir and hemlock. The air had that October taste, metallic, leaf-wet, bracketed by wood smoke from some cabin at the edge of the world. When the wind moved, it brought a cold cathedral smell from higher up, a breath that had been snow last week, and would be snow again. It's important that you understand how normal it felt. Their packs creaked and settled, and the conversation took that easy shape it always took. Sam, narrating his own life in the third person. "Samuels and Company regrets to inform you the CFO of Snacks has underdelivered gummy bears." Nora asking small questions that unlocked large answers. Ethan ticking off mental checklists, fire ring, bear hang, water source. David humming something under his breath that didn't sound like a tune so much as a place he had been once. They passed a trail register at the Pine Gate, and signed their names with a Sharpie on a chain. Ethan L. Sam R. Nora Vive. David M. Ethan checked the last entries like a man checking traffic patterns. A pair of day hikers yesterday. A solo backpacker 3 days ago. Initials only. No logout times. Not unheard of. Not notable. He wrote their ETA, Sunday noon. 2 miles in they hit the first switchbacks, and the conversation thinned to breath. That's when Nora saw the ribbon. The kind of orange construction tape surveyors use. Knotted to a fur at eye level. She paused, touched it. The tape felt new, unweathered. The knot was clean. "Trail marking?" she said. Ethan glanced back. "No markings out here. Volunteer crews use blue blaze in this district." Sam leaned against the tree dramatically. "It marks the edge of the fairy ring. Step inside, your name goes backwards and your bones go forward." "Step inside," David said without looking up from his footwork. You'll just be on the other side of the tree." But when they started walking again, Nora checked her left shoulder more than once, the way you check a door lock twice, after you've already locked it. They made the creek at golden hour. The light braided through the canopy in long, thoughtful bands. The campsite was as advertised. Flat duff, a circle of stones black with 100 stories, ash, a sitting log worn smooth by strangers. The creek itself ran clear and narrow in October's thinness, not much to look at, but enough to speak when the night got quiet. "Home," Ethan said, and set the packs down in a row. He gave them 5 minutes to shake out arms and legs before he started handing out jobs in that way that makes you think you volunteered. "Sam, firewood; Nora, water and filter. David, you and I can do tents." "Copy," Sam said, snatching the collapsible saw like a knight grabs a lance. He moved into the deadfall beyond the clearing, whistling a tune that might have been cheerful, might have been defiance. Nora crouched by the creek, and knelt the way believers do at railings, careful not to silt the intake. She primed the filter, counted strokes in her head, watched tiny bubbles spin in the clear plastic like trapped ghosts. Above her, leaves drifted slow spirals through cold light. She felt a little foolish about the ribbon, and a little foolish for feeling foolish. She looked across the water into the darker trees beyond, and told herself the truth. The forest wasn't looking at her any more than the ocean looks at a ship. It just is. Back in the clearing, David worked in a quiet duet with Ethan, stakes in with the heel of a hand, guy lines taut as harp strings. You could tell they'd camped together before by the way they anticipated each other's next need. Hand a stake before it was asked for. Pinch the vestibule door open at the angle that costs the other man no motion. When David threw the fly over his tent, he paused and adjusted the corners by inches, until the geometry pleased him. It mattered to him. Small rightnesses inside a big world. They ate well. Pasta tossed with olive oil and a rain of palm from a battered tin. Pan bread Ethan slapped into shape and flopped onto a hot skillet. The fire burned low and right, a licking hand. Sam told a story about a date that had gone both well and badly. Well until the moment, badly after, punctuating all of it with the kind of laugh that asks permission from anyone who knows him well enough to grant it. Nora told a smaller story about her grandmother teaching her to whistle with 2 fingers, and then demonstrated, and the note carried high and sweet across the creek like glass spun thin. "Okay," Sam said, satisfied. "This trip goes down as a 5 out of 10 haunted, tops." 2, Ethan said, cutting another square of bread. "Weather's stable. Creek's clean. No trash in the pit. The bears are with their attorneys, negotiating winter." 7, Nora said, but she was smiling. 3, David said finally. Because of the tape, they watched the fire make small amber countries over the log. Someone put on a pot of coffee for later. Even though it was already later, the stars appeared carefully in the brittle space between black trees, each one pricked through like a thumbtack in velvet. If you had been there, you might have leaned back in your own camp chair, put your boots on the log and thought, whatever else is broken in my life, this part is not. They tucked in before midnight. Ethan did the last circuit with a headlamp, food hung, embers banked, perimeter check for widowmakers, and then paused over David's tent. "You good?" Ethan said. David was in his bag, reading by headlamp. He nodded. "Yeah." "You'll hear creak all night," Ethan said. "Dream about rain." David switched off the lamp and lay back. "Good," he said into the fabric dark. Ethan zipped his own tent, counted 3 slow breaths to settle his head, and tilted into sleep like a man stepping into warm water. Night holds a sound the day cannot. The diagnostic hum of a place at rest. The creek wrote its small letters onto stones and read them back. The fire's last timber sighed, and collapsed inward, with the soft showmanship of a played-out actor taking a bow. Somewhere uphill, a branch unhooked itself from its parent and fell in a rustle that became a thud, that became nothing. An owl asked a question, and got an honest answer. "You know this music," You've slept to it and woken to it and told yourself 100 times that if anything were truly wrong, the woods would tell you by going quiet. Around 3, Ethan surfaced the way a swimmer does, surprised to find himself near air. He did not know why he'd woken. The dream he'd been inside of had no teeth. He listened automatically. The creak. The fire's carbon whisper. The nylon's occasional click as a gust traveled through trees and remembered him. He nearly smiled. Then, from outside his tent, in that exact drawer of quiet, where a whisper is neither rude nor shy, someone spoke his name. Ethan. It wasn't a poke. It wasn't a prank voice pitched in a ghost register to be funny. It was the way your own name sounds when your mother calls you from the next room. Soft, precise, borrowed breath threaded through syllables she made herself. Ethan's first thought, ridiculous and immediate, was, Nora had a nightmare. He reached for the zipper. Yeah? He said, keeping his voice low so he didn't wake Sam, didn't wake the day, didn't wake the thing you have to fight if you wake it wrong. Nothing. The creek kept writing its letter. The tent kept its small talk. Ethan waited a full 10 seconds. The longest 10 seconds a man can count in the dark, and said, a fraction louder, Nora? A zipper from another tent. Sam's whisper through nylon. You up? Yeah, Ethan said. I thought. Bathroom, Sam said. Brain thinks I'm 10. Ethan exhaled, surprised by how much he'd been holding. He heard Sam unzip, heard the pretense of stealth, heard him go 3 steps and then stop. Silence. Then, very softly, Sam again. But not from Sam's mouth. Ethan, the voice said from 6 feet to the right of Ethan's head. Outside the tent wall, close enough that the nylon membrane caught and smoothed it. The same gentle cadence, the same intimacy. A fair imitation. Too fair. Ethan lay that way a moment. Hands open on the sleeping bag, eyes on the dark ridgepole, feeling the neatness of the nylon around him turn in one slow degree into a fact about confinement. Sam, he said. From farther away at the edge of the creek, dude, don't say my name like that. Like what? Like I'm the ghost of Christmas hydration. Ethan pulled the zipper 3 inches, and breathed the night like a diver taking a test sip of air. The clearing looked the way it should look. Sam stood slightly hunched with his headlamp cupped in his palm so the beam wouldn't blow apart their night vision. His breath plumed into the halo like smoke signals. Ethan listened for the sound the woods make when they're holding their breath. He heard only the creak, the particular antihistamine snore from the woman who has never snored in her life, and would deny it tomorrow with righteous fire. He shut the zipper and lay back down. Chill, he said softly, it's nothing. A minute later the creak gave an impression of growing louder. Not louder, exactly. Closer. As if the distance between sound and listener had closed a notch, while everything else remained where it belonged. Ethan tried the oldest trick in the book. He counted. At 20, he was smiling at himself. At 60, he wasn't. At 90, the woods said his name again. Ethan. But not near his head, and not in Sam's voice, and not in Nora's either. The voice was smaller, compressed, as if it had been played through a speaker the size of a matchbox. Ethan's fingers met the tent zipper, like a man shaking hands with a snake he now realizes is real. He did not go out. He lay still, every muscle awire, and let the night finish the sentence it had started. It did not. That, somehow, was worse. He slept after that. Not well. Not deeply. The sleep that comes in shavings and not in boards. When morning arrived, it did so cleanly. Light hitting tent fabric in a flowery wash. Creek making up for last night by gossiping louder. Ethan unzipped and found the day's face the same as yesterday's. Sam was already coaxing a flame from yesterday's coal with the devotion of a man starting a tiny civilization. Nora had her boots half on and was braiding her hair with the focus of a surgeon. David sat on the log, hands around a mug, eyes on the middle distance. He looked like a statue of a person thinking about leaving. "Sleep," Ethan said. Nora made a seesaw gesture with her hand. "Medium. Like a drive-through coffee." "Sam snores," she said. "Love and indictment in equal amounts." "I do not." "You do," David said quietly. Sam pointed at the creek. "The creek snores, I merely harmonize." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. "There are some things you don't throw into the center of a good morning, because you don't want to watch them burn. A voice saying your name where a voice shouldn't be. A feeling that your own campsite had stood closer to you last night than the night before." He let it go. He told himself, you don't spook a group on day one. You don't call thunder on a blue sky. They ate oatmeal with cinnamon and brown sugar, and the little packet of walnuts Ethan had been saving for a piss-poor day. It tasted like a good choice. They planned a long day hike up to the ridge and back with enough light to spare for a nap. Before they started out, Ethan did his ritual again. Checked the bear hang, tested the tents, guy lines, set the coffee tin in a sunnier patch so it wouldn't tempt a raccoon. He found nothing wrong. He told himself that meant everything was right. Down at the creek, Nora filled bottles and let her eyes wander across the waterline to that darker shore. She saw a shape, a vertical suggestion behind two leaning trunks, that could have been a birch-peeled ghost pale by weather. Could have been a standing rock lined with lichen. Could have been a person. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't look at it long enough for it to become anything. She screwed the caps tight and sang, under her breath, the little melody her grandmother had taught her for luck. On the way out of camp, Sam paused by the sitting log and stuck 2 twigs upright in the ash, tiny antlers on a tiny skull, and laughed at his own joke. David glanced at it and made a face that might have been amusement or not. Ethan shook his head but didn't kick them down. They left the clearing to itself, the fireflies asleep in roots, the ribbon of creek refolding. If you'd taken a photograph of their backs as they walked away, 4 figures in a file through cathedral light, you might have felt something like pride for them, for being people who remember how to go to the places where the world is still the world. You would not have seen the way the air behind them changed, just a fractional darkening, like a thought entering a room. You would not have heard the creek speak quieter to itself for a moment, as if measuring the language it would need later. They spent the day the way people spend days that later become important for reasons you couldn't guess then. The ridge was a clean line against a hard blue. The view into the next valley had that desolation you can give to people by way of a postcard. Sturdy trees, stubborn hills, a distance that flattens time. They ate lunch on a warm rock, and let the sun rewire the cold out of their hands. Sam tried to teach Nora a card trick, with a deck gone soft at the corners. Nora, delighted, pretended to be fooled, long after she had figured out where the queen hid. Ethan made a joke about the time Sam had tried to fix a fuel canister with a lighter and a prayer. David told them about the river his father took him to when he was 9, how the current had taken the boy's fear and kept it for him so he could pick it up later, when he needed it. He didn't look at them while he spoke. He looked at far water. They returned to camp with daylight to spare. The fire cooperated. The coffee did that thing coffee does in the woods where it tastes like the first truthful thing you've had all week. They ate too much of everything and then ate more. Evening fell with both hands. Stars arrived with intent. 2 out of 10 haunted, Sam said, clearing plates. 3, David said, almost smiling. 5, Nora said softly, and neither of them asked her why. Forecast says no wind, Ethan said, checking the trees, crowns against the slice of sky. Good sleep. They went down in a stagger. Sam first because he always did, because he lived like every minute was already paid for. Nora next, after brushing her teeth so long her gums went pale. Ethan after another perimeter walk, after one last glance at the creek. David last, because David liked to watch the fire until it chose its last shape. When the dark finally set its weight, it did it like a man laying a coat across a sleeping child, carefully, evenly, with an apology it hoped the child wouldn't hear. The creek kept speaking, but softer now, close to a whisper. The pop of the last coal sounded like a knuckle cracked in a quiet church. The tents made those conversational clicks again. Somewhere above them, a branch took on ice and let it go. The night did what nights do. It gathered itself. At 2:11 a.m., deep inside the hour when the body makes bad promises to itself, something in the soundscape changed. You might not have noticed it at first. You might have chalked it to the wind rolling over, to the creek stepping behind a different rock. But if you had been the kind of person who sleeps with one ear open, if you had been a ranger or a quarryman or a mother, you would have heard it the way a doctor hears a murmur, the missing note, the subtraction. The forest held its breath. Ethan did not wake because he heard something. Ethan woke because he did not. He lay still, hand on the zipper before his mind had caught up. He couldn't hear the creek. Not that it had stopped existing, but that the air between him and it had thickened in a way sound didn't want to cross. He waited for an owl. Nothing. He waited for Sam's slow exhale that always squeaked a little at the end. Nothing. The silence had that density certain rooms get seconds before a verdict. He reached for his headlamp by memory. Thumbed the rubber button. Dead. He flexed it twice like a man coaxing life back into a bird. Dead. From the trees to the right of camp, about as far as a good throw, a voice the size of a mouth cupped close to your ear said, clear as water, "Ethan." He did not unzip the tent, he did not speak, he let the name sit in the nylon with him, a guest with impeccable manners, and pretended he hadn't heard it at all. You were there for the beginning, you needed to be. Because once people start asking where a man goes from a tent zipped on the inside, they forget that's not where it starts. It starts with a single word said the right way by the wrong mouth in a forest that suddenly, and decisively, has nothing else to say. And now we can move on. But understand this. Nothing about that first day foreshadowed the shape of the last. That's why campfire stories work. Because they are about ordinary people who mistake a pause for a peace, a name for a welcome, a silence for a blessing. You know better. You're still listening. Ethan woke at 2:17 a.m. with the particular alertness of a man who didn't want to be awake. He lay perfectly still, eyes fixed on the faint ribcage of poles above him, the nylon gently twitching with every breath of wind. But there wasn't wind. Not really. Not anymore. The creek's chatter had thinned into a dull murmur, like a voice pressed behind a heavy door. Then came the whisper. Ethan. It was quiet enough that he almost convinced himself it belonged to the dream he'd just left. But dreams don't know your name with that kind of precision. Dreams don't press the syllables so close to your ear you can feel the shape of lips that aren't there. He swallowed hard, let his hand drift toward the zipper. Logic arrived quickly, like a lawyer in his head. Sam. It has to be Sam. Messing around, or drunk on too much coffee, trying to get a rise. Yeah, Ethan whispered back, soft enough not to wake Nora in the next tent over. Silence. Then a shuffle of leaves, deliberate, slow. He sat upright, heartbeat loud, in the small nylon chamber. The whisper didn't come again. By dawn he was convincing himself it had been nothing. An animal's breath through brush. His own half-dream. Something explainable. But when the group gathered around the fire for oatmeal, he tossed a pebble into the coals and said, casual as he could, "Who was screwing with me last night? Outside the tent." Sam looked up from his spoon. "What? Calling my name? Don't play dumb." Sam smirked, then squinted. "Man, I was out cold," asked Nora. "I snore like a buzzsaw, right?" Nora nodded, smiling faintly. Tragically true, none of us moved all night. David just sipped coffee, eyes low. Ethan wanted to press, wanted to demand, but the laughter that followed was too easy, too normal, and he wasn't ready to be the one who carried strangeness into daylight. The second night was colder, the fire brighter, the shadows longer. They sat until the coals broke into red eyes, swapping small stories, passing the flask. When Ethan mentioned needing more wood, David stood without a word. "I'll get it," he said, pulling on his jacket. Sam waved a hand. "Take the saw." "Deadfall's thicker back near the bend." David gave a small nod and vanished into the trees, the headlamp beam cutting a clean slice through the dark. The woods swallowed him quickly. At first they didn't notice the time. Oatmeal pots were rinsed. Sam launched into another long, wandering joke. Nora drew her knees to her chest and hummed low, but then Ethan checked his watch. 40 minutes. Too long for a handful of branches. "Should we?" Ethan started, but Sam interrupted. "He's fine. You know David. Guy loves a project. Probably building a log cabin out there." But another 20 minutes slid past. The fire collapsed inward, sparks skipping away like frightened insects. "Okay," Ethan said, standing. "This isn't right." They took flashlights, 3 white cones stabbing at the dark, and fanned out toward where David had gone. "David!" Ethan's voice rang through the trees, bouncing back wrong, not echo, but distortion. "Yo, genius!" Sam shouted, more bravado than concern. "Quit playing Mountain Man." Fire's dying. Only silence. And silence in a forest is its own kind of violence. They searched an hour. Every trail, every hollow, the creek bank slick with moss. Nothing. When they returned, their stomachs dropped further. David's tent sat zipped shut, flap perfect, as if never touched. His boots were lined up by the entrance, his pack leaned against the log, untouched. "Bullshit," Sam muttered, yanking the zipper down. Inside, sleeping bag laid out neatly, headlamp coiled on top, like he'd prepared for bed. Nora pressed a hand over her mouth. "He never came back." Ethan whispered the words like a verdict. "But his gear's here." The argument that followed was messy, frantic. Sam wanted to hike out for help. Ethan argued the trail would be worse in the dark. Nora just kept repeating, "Something's wrong. Something's wrong." Then came the voice. "Guys, I'm here, help me." They froze. It came from the tree line, faint but familiar. David's voice. "David!" Sam lunged forward, flashlight beam jittering. "Where the hell?" Nora grabbed his sleeve. No, that's not him." Ethan swallowed, forcing calm. "Maybe he's hurt, maybe." But the voice came again, this time from the opposite side of camp. "Guys? It's me." Nora's nails dug into Ethan's arm. "Don't. Listen to it. That's not him." "Help me," David's voice called again. Closer now. Too close. Sam's jaw worked like he wanted to shout, but thought better of it. Ethan raised his light, sweeping the trees. Empty. Always empty. They tried calling his name, hoping to guide him back. "David!" Ethan yelled. "David!" Sam echoed. The woods answered instantly. David's voice from deep left. "David!" Then from behind them. "David!" Then whispered right by Nora's ear. "David!" She staggered back, nearly fell into the fire ring. "Stop it!" she screamed. "That's not him!" And the forest went silent. The silence lasted seconds, or an hour, the kind of silence that becomes a sound itself. Then the mimicry began in earnest. Every word they spoke, every syllable, every gasp, the woods repeated. Ethan muttered, "This isn't happening," and from behind the tents, "This isn't happening." Sam swore, loud, angry, and the forest swore back, louder, like a chorus of mockery. When Nora whispered, "Please stop," the whisper returned, identical, but closer. The mimicry grew confident, like something practicing until it mastered the pitch. Soon it wasn't delayed at all. Every time they opened their mouths, the words came back at the same time, overlapping, like they were being spoken twice, once by them, once by something else. Flashlights flickered. The batteries drained with unnatural speed, beams guttering into thin ghosts of light. They huddled back into the center of camp, then finally into one tent, the nylon a flimsy skin between them and the voices. The mimicry circled. Footsteps pressed deliberately in the leaves. The shape of their own words stalked them like wolves, never breaking rhythm, never faltering. "Don't talk," Ethan whispered, desperate. And instantly outside. "Don't talk." Nora sobbed into her hands, and her sobbing was repeated back, the same cadence, the same shuddering breaks, doubled and surrounding them. The forest, alive with their voices, the forest, silent otherwise. And they realized, nothing else moved, nothing else breathed. The woods themselves were holding still, listening, letting the mimicry take center stage. They retreated into Ethan's tent because it felt like a decision, and decisions feel like control. The nylon walls went up with a hiss of zippers and shivering fingers. Inside, their 3 headlamps threw weak cones across sleeping bags and stuff sacks, pale islands in a sea of olive drab. Outside, the forest rearranged itself around their breathing. "Okay," Ethan said, voice kept to a narrow bandwidth. "We sit tight until first light, no one wanders. We keep speaking to a minimum. Whatever can't use what it doesn't hear." "It already heard a lot," Nora whispered. Outside, their own voices replied, layered and near perfect. "It already heard a lot," Nora whispered. Sam flinched like he'd been touched. "That settles it, right? We shut up." "Shut up," the woods agreed. The timing was so tight now the 2 syllables arrived braided together, Sam's mouth and the unseen doubles landing on the same beat, like a duet that had rehearsed for years. Ethan raised a finger, then stopped himself from speaking. He dug in his pack and pulled out a small spiral notebook and a pencil wrapped with tape. He wrote, "No talking. Write only." He turned the page and scribbled Dawn Plan, "Stay put," and pushed it to the others. Sam nodded. Nora squeezed the pencil and wrote phones. Ethan pulled his out, thumb already seeking bars. No service glowed back, the tiny battery icon dipping lower than he remembered. He tried the camera. The screen lit, then dimmed, then blinked, as if reconsidering the value of being alive. He hit record anyway, pointed the lens at the sliver of mesh that looked out on the fire ring. From outside, quiet footfalls began to creep. Leaves compressed with precision, a measured circling that went, SHFF pause, SHFF pause, clockwork in pace, merciless in patience. Ethan held the phone like a talisman as the footsteps marked another lap. The phone vibrated once, then died. Sam cursed under his breath, then snapped his mouth shut, eyes wide. He pressed the pencil to paper harder than necessary. Batteries are draining on purpose. Like last time. He stopped, crossed out last time, wrote like something's pulling juice instead. The footsteps halted right outside the vestibule. The fabric trembled in a faint inward bow, as if breathed upon from an inch away. No wind, no shifting branches, just pressure. Nora wrote, "It's listening." She slid the notebook back. Ethan nodded. He tore the page out, folded it twice, tucked it into his breast pocket like a contract he intended to honor. Minutes stretched. The tense nylon clicked softly as it cooled. Somewhere beyond the pines, the creek should have been talking, but even water can be strangled by silence. The hush grew so thick their own heartbeats sounded mechanical. Ethan tested a thought he'd been dreading. "We need a test," he wrote, call and response controlled. "I'll say something we can predict, then not say anything, see if it repeats a thing we didn't speak." He slid the page to the others. Sam grimaced, wrote, "Don't poke the bear then," after a beat, but okay. Ethan lifted a finger, 1, and mouthed, "On 3. He counted in his head, 1, 2, 3. Very softly he said, "Alpha." Outside, a breath later, "Alpha." He wrote again. Now silence. They counted to 5. To 10. To 30. The woods said nothing. The air between the tent and the trees was a held breath that didn't belong to lungs. He mouthed again and said, slightly louder, "Alpha Bravo." Alpha Bravo. The woods returned, closer, perfect pitch, perfect pace. Sam grabbed the notebook and scrawled gibberish. then scribbled a string of nonsense letters. Kosul or tin. He looked at Ethan, arm raised in question. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Sam whispered, Clawton. From outside, Clawton. The voice matched the invented word with the confidence of memory. Nora dug the pencil's point into the paper so hard it threatened to break. It learns. She underlined learns 3 times, then wrote, stop feeding it. They tried absolute quiet, no whispers, no tapping, no mercy to their bodies, urged to shift and cough, and fill a void with anything human. The footsteps resumed their orbit. Clockwise. Always clockwise. Every 40 seconds they passed the vestibule. Ethan started counting in his head, and, without wanting to, matched breath to the cadence. He pressed 2 fingertips to his wrist, to catch the pulse there, and found it falling in step 2. He jerked his hand away, angry at his own blood for cooperating. Sam scribbled again. I can't sit here. I need to see what it is. If it's a person, we can stop it. Nora took the page and wrote, if it's a person, they'd answer to their own name. David didn't. She paused, then wrote smaller. He did, but only after us. Ethan's jaw tightened. He wrote, code question. Ask something only David knows. He let the pencil hover. But how many things did they truly know about each other that a mimic couldn't harvest from the last hour of panic? He tried anyway. Ask his sister's nickname. He told us on the trail. Sam nodded, then frowned. Allie, he said before clamping a hand over his mouth. Allie, the forest repeated from 2 different places, one from the left, a half-second late, one from the right, perfectly on time. Sam's anger popped, like a vein. He lunged for the zipper, but Ethan's hand was faster, clamping on his wrist. The nylon hissed with the threat of motion. Let go, Sam mouthed. Ethan shook his head, hard, then wrote, it wants the door open. The moment the pencil lifted from the page, a whisper pressed itself against the tent fabric. It wants the door open. Ethan's voice, recited at a breath's remove. The 3 of them stared at the rippling nylon, as if a throat had pressed there, shaping words into the weave. Nora squeezed her eyes shut, head bowed, lips moving. Prayer. The pencil twitched again. What if we write to David? Paper under the fly. Silent. Tell him to answer without a sound. Like tap once for yes. She looked at Ethan, pleading. At least it was action. They tore a page, wrote David. If you can see this, tap once. Yes. Twice. No. Do not speak. Ethan inched forward, moving like someone negotiating with a predator. Small, telegraphed motions. Open hands. Spine reluctant to present itself. He cracked the zipper just enough to push the note under the vestibule flap, then sealed the teeth again with trembling fingers. They waited. 40 seconds. The orbit reached the vestibule. There was no tap. Another 40. Nothing. On the 3rd pass there was a tap. 1. Then, immediately, 2 more, much lighter. A stutter. Or mockery. Sam's face went bright with a brief painful hope, then fell again. 1 tap, he whispered despite everything, head cocked toward the sound. 1 tap, the woods said, perfect and quiet and delighted. Ethan's stomach dropped. He hadn't realized until then that he'd been waiting for something, someone, to play by human rules. The thing out there gleefully declined the invitation. The notebook page under the vestibule rustled. Nora grabbed Ethan's sleeve. He leaned forward and pinched the paper's edge with 2 fingers through the mesh. It slid back as if pushed toward him from outside. He pulled it inside. 3 neat lines had been drawn across the bottom margin. Not pen. Not pencil. Something had scored the paper with 3 parallel grooves equidistant and perfectly straight. There was no other mark, no messy fingerprint of mud, no human smudge. Nora's breath hitched. Sam swallowed a word whole. Ethan folded the page and put it in his pocket with the first one. 2 talismans now, 2 debts. His watch ticked at his wrist. He checked it out of habit. 2:17 a.m. again. He stared at the face for a long, impossible moment. Hadn't it been 2:17 when he'd woken the first night? He clicked the crown. The second hand jolted forward, obedient. He watched it sweep. When it hit the 12 it hesitated, then went backward to 11, then forward again, then stopped. The tiny machine thrummed against his pulse like a moth against glass. He covered the watch with his palm. "Okay," he wrote. "Deliberate, new plan. We don't give it anything. We don't test, we don't ask, we don't challenge. We wait, we breathe. Dawn will break the spine of this." He tried to sound like a leader even in graphite. Outside, the footsteps paused, as if considering. Then the mimicry picked up a different game. It began repeating their breathing. 3 beats in, 3 beats out. The rhythm synced with their bodies until the inside and the outside felt like they shared lungs. Nora wrapped her arms around herself and curled smaller, as if the tent could shrink to fit her, and thereby deny the world any purchase. Sam pressed his palms to his eardrums, teeth bared. Ethan closed his eyes and counted 30, 60, 90, trading time for time. When the count hit 90, a stone clacked softly against the fire ring, not thrown hard. Placed with intention. Then another. Then a third. He opened his eyes, and though the tent hid the view, he knew, the 3 stones would be laid equidistant around the circle, like the grooves on the paper, like a rule of 3s that belonged to something that learned faster than people thought, and enjoyed patterns the way a child enjoys knocking over blocks. He didn't write that down, he didn't speak it, he just knew it the way you know the shape of your own name in the dark. The footsteps resumed their orbit. They had time, which meant the thing outside had more. Some time past the hour that pretends to be night's spine, Sam's patience cracked. Crack isn't quite right. It leaked out of him slow as sap. Then suddenly there was nothing sticky left holding him together, and he was reaching for the zipper again. Ethan's hand found his wrist, but this time, Sam was too quick. The teeth parted a quarter inch. Cold breathed in. And with that cold came a voice so soft it barely had mass. "Sam," it said in David's exact tone, warmth and worry threaded through. "Don't let them stop you." Sam froze with the pull tab pinched between thumb and forefinger. The voice continued. "Now from behind them, now from the left." "It's fine. It's me." Nora shook her head hard, eyes glossy. She wrote code and under it. "Question only he knows." She added another line. "Ask what you asked him at the Overlook." Sam blinked, then nodded, and for the first time since the circling began, something like strategy looked back at the thing in the trees. He pressed his mouth almost against the mesh and whispered, "What did I say to you just before the hawk flew? Exact words." The answer came too fast, too eager. "You said, 'You seeing this?'" Sam half smiled. "Close," he breathed. "What exact words, David?" Silence. Then, slower, "You said, 'Are you seeing this?'" Sam's face drained. He hadn't said he'd said you. 2 words, wrong order, minor, human, forgivable. Unless the thing outside didn't forgive, and didn't forget, and didn't guess, it learned. It corrected itself 5 seconds later, same voice. "You said, 'You seeing this?'" The correction was worse than the mistake. Nora's hands were shaking so hard the pencil point broke. She didn't need to write what all 3 of them understood. It had processed the error. It wouldn't make that one again. "You're hurt," Sam tried, sick with hope he hated himself for carrying. "Tell us where." "By the creek," David's voice answered instantly, from 6 directions at once. "Hurry." Nora wrote, "We never told it there's a creek." Ethan answered by tilting his head. They had mentioned water earlier, casually. The forest listens even when you tell yourself it can't. Ethan dragged the pack between his knees and dug. Space blanket, whistle, flare. He pulled the flare out and stared at it. Fire pushes animals. Light deters men. He didn't know what deterred a thing that dreamed your breath in your own cadence and wore your friend's voice like an unwrinkled shirt. He scribbled, "If things go bad, flare." Sam nodded like a drowning man nods at a floating branch. Nora pinched her lips to keep them from saying please out loud to no one and everyone. The footsteps at the perimeter shifted subtlety. Still clockwise. Still precise. But closer. Leaves whispered against the tense rainfly. The nylon's microfibers translated pressure into sound. A soft, long shh, like the tent itself, was asking them to be quiet. The three of them stopped breathing until lungs scalded, and their brains sent hot needles down their limbs in protest. "Don't," Nora mouthed, as Sam's shoulders started to heave. The tent agreed. A fraction of a second later, "Don't." Ethan popped the cap off the flare. He did not strike it. Not yet. The promise of fire was heavy in his hand. He had the sense that if he wasted it, the night would keep the receipt and deny him a refund. He slid it back into the pack, then out again, then back. He was negotiating with a future he didn't control. They tried another silent signal. Ethan dug out paracord and tied it to a tent stake, ran it to the pole by the vestibule and tapped it once, twang. Then twice. Then 3 times. An old backcountry trick. Vibrations carry through cord. If David were out there, he could answer without sound. On the next orbit, the cord quivered in an answering twang. 1. Then 2. Then 3. Relief flared, but it hit a hard edge. The timing landed exactly on the footfall beat. The answer had been scheduled. It wasn't that something felt the vibration and responded. It was that something calculated what a response should look like, and glued it to a rhythm it already owned. Sam wrote "screw this" and zipped his jacket to the throat. He wasn't leaving, not yet, but he wanted to feel less exposed to the air that carried their voices away and brought copies back. He looked enormous in the small tent, shoulders filling angles never intended for bulk and adrenaline. The footfalls stopped. Then the mimic tried something new. It began to speak without their prompts, but not in David's voice now. In Ethan's. Calm. Practical. "It's getting colder," it said from the vestibule, Ethan's baritone just the other side of the nylon. "You'll fall asleep. Don't." From behind them, Nora's voice floated in, tender and urgent. "We should have stayed on the ridge. I'm sorry." From the far side of the camp Sam called, exasperated and laughing in a way he hadn't since before any of this. "We're idiots, man. We'll laugh at this tomorrow." The laugh that followed wasn't Sam's. It had the right notes, the wrong soul. Ethan's skin crawled with a new kind of cold. The thing didn't only repeat, it curated. It was selecting from the sound bank of their lives, dragging forward tones they would trust, their own. He fumbled for the whistle in his kit and pressed it into Nora's palm. "If it breaches, blow." She nodded and wrapped her fingers around it as if it were pulse warm. Sam looked at Ethan with a face split between apology and defiance, then wrote, "I'm asking one more thing. I need it to slip." He put the notebook aside, leaned forward, and said at a conversational volume, "David, what's the name of the diner we hit after Cedar Notch? The one with the blue sign. What did you order?" Silence. Leaves counting themselves. Then, uncertain, "Mabel's. Too quick again. I had pancakes." Sam smiled a little, not happy. "Margot's," he said. "Blueberry pie. You hate pancakes." The woods adjusted. "Margot's, blueberry pie." The second take was perfect. Too perfect. It placed the words in the air like tiles on a board. "Yeah," Sam said to no one, throat tight. "Figured." Nora's fingers whitened around the whistle. She wrote "Dawn," underlined it twice. "We hold." The word hold felt like a prayer that had to be invented on the fly, because the old ones didn't know about this particular god. A faint scraping started near the fire ring. Metal on stone. The poker they'd used earlier to shift coals slid an inch, paused, slid again. Ethan pictured the ring. 3 stones newly placed equidistant. He knew without seeing that the poker would stop when it aligned perfectly between 2 of them. It did. They heard the final ting against rock. Precision without hurry, joyless play. Then from the right, David again, but weaker, barely above breath. Guys, please. I can't move my legs. Nora squeezed her eyes closed against the needle of compassion that pierced even now. Ethan wrote, "Ask the thing we wouldn't know," and under it his middle name, then crossed it out because maybe someone had said it once. He wrote first cassette he owned, then crossed it out because that too had been nostalgia on the trail. Every piece of human trivia had been entertainment earlier. The forest might have been listening from the beginning, Sam asked anyway, quietly bitter. First song we sang in the car, day one. The pause was longer this time. Then the answer arrived like a dealer sliding a card across felt. Tom Petty. Sam let out a breath he'd been holding since they left the trailhead. It was Springsteen, he said. You hated Tom Petty. The trees accepted the correction. Springsteen. The forest agreed, and on the last syllable, a second voice overlapped it. Sam's, so that for an instant, the air held a chord made of two Sams, two truths and no way out. The headlamps dimmed to the color of fish belly. Ethan clicked his off, to save the last smear of charge. The others followed, and the tent collapsed into a shape suggested by touch and memory more than sight. Time thinned. Once the footsteps stopped for so long, Ethan almost believed it had left. Then the zipper teeth at the vestibule sang a single dry note, a plucked string, without moving even a fraction. Not pulled, just touched. It knew the sound the tent would make if it were opened. It knew their hearts would answer. Ethan's grip found the flare again. He didn't strike it. They tried to do something impossible. Sleep in slices. 10 breaths with eyes closed, 10 with open. Count, trade, fail, try again. The mimic matched the counts, until numbers lost their edges, and became a smear across their brains. When Sam reached 50, the woods announced 50 in a children's choir cadence that buckled his face into something like rage with no use. Don't answer when the woods call your name, Ethan's grandmother had once said on a porch in a town where the scariest animal was a stray dog. He had laughed because he had not yet met silence that could wear a voice like a mask. The creek beyond the pines tugged at its gag. Somewhere a bird fidgeted in a dream, then thought better of it. The world considered dawn as if it were a question with more than one answer. The footfalls, comfortable in their orbit, tightened another inch. Ethan wrote one last note before his fingers forgot how to spell. We make no more sound. Not until light. The woods breathed his sentence back, sweet as a lullaby. We make no more sound. Not until light. They didn't answer. They couldn't afford to. And the night leaned closer to listen to the only thing left. The small, stubborn noise of 3 living hearts trying not to become part of a chorus. The night inside the tent had already taken on its own rhythm. Breath, silence, step, echo. But now the rules began to bend. The footsteps no longer circled with the neat, clockwork cadence they had earlier. Instead, they darted, stopped, reversed. Ethan realized with a sick jolt that the thing outside had abandoned the orbit. It didn't need to keep pace anymore. It had learned enough. A whisper pressed against the nylon, right by Nora's head. Ethan. Perfect pitch. Her brother's name spoken in her own voice. She clapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide, tears shimmering even in the near dark. From the far side of the tent, a different voice came, this time Sam's. Nora, are you awake? It was kind, familiar. Exactly how he'd said it earlier in the evening when they'd been settling their packs. Sam shook his head violently, muttering through his teeth, That wasn't me, that wasn't. And then the forest joined in. That wasn't me, Sam's voice said again, louder, sharper, as if mocking the denial. Then another version, That wasn't me, in Ethan's tone. That wasn't me, in Nora's. All 3 voices spun together until the words lost meaning, became a chant. Ethan's jaw locked tight. He pressed a finger to his lips, but his own voice from outside cut the gesture off. Don't shush me, Ethan. A laugh followed. His laugh, only wrong, bent slightly too high at the end, like it was proud of itself for pulling the imitation off. Nora broke first. She curled into herself, shoulders heaving as sobs tore free. The forest wasted no time. From every direction came the exact sound of her crying, perfectly mirrored, as though the trees themselves had learned grief. The echoes weren't delayed, they were simultaneous. Each sob doubled, trebled, until it sounded like dozens of Noras were out there, a whole chorus of her pain carried on invisible throats. She pressed her hands to her ears, but it didn't matter. The mimicry was too precise, too close. She could feel her own cries vibrating against her skull from both inside and outside. "Make it stop," she choked. Sam snapped. The pressure of hours of silence, circling footsteps, and now this cruel mocking fractured all at once. He shouted, raw and furious, "Shut up!" The woods obliged. "Shut up!" Ethan's voice screamed from behind them. "Shut up!" Nora's voice shrieked from the trees. "Shut up!" Sam's own voice howled back at him, louder than his original cry, each repetition stacked, until the forest itself seemed to tear with rage. The tent walls trembled. Ethan grabbed Sam by the shoulders, trying to steady him, but Sam thrashed free. "It's in our heads!" he yelled. "It's in the goddamn woods, in the air!" Again the forest repeated every syllable. "It's in our heads, it's in the goddamn woods, in the air." 3 voices, 5 voices, 10. Until there was no telling whose mouth had birthed the words first. Then, silence. Not the earlier silence of insects cut short or creeks muted. This was a deeper void, one that seemed to erase the memory of sound itself. Their ears rang with the absence. Ethan realized he'd been gripping his flare in one hand, the useless husk of his dead flashlight in the other. He didn't remember drawing them, but they were there, talismans against something that respected neither light nor flame. Into that silence came David's voice. It was perfect, too perfect, every phoneme crisp, every syllable surgically clean. "One of you will stay with me," Nora whimpered. "David," she whispered before clapping her hand back over her mouth. The voice answered instantly, the same phrase but louder, stretched until it filled the clearing outside. "One of you will stay with me." Ethan felt his stomach cave inward. That wasn't David. Not the David they'd hiked with, laughed with. This thing didn't stumble over vowels or breathe between words. It delivered the sentence like a verdict. The nylon bulged inward. Not just in one spot but all around them, as though dozens of hands pressed against the tent at once. Fingers traced the seams, palms pressed flat, invisible arms leaning in from every angle. The tent, meant for 3, now felt like it was the only barrier holding back a crowd. Zippers sang their dry metallic notes, first at the vestibule, then along the back panel, then across seams that had no zippers at all. Teeth slid though no one touched them, opening gaps that weren't there seconds before. Cold air licked through each seam, brushing over their skin like the prelude to being seized. Sam struck his headlamp in desperation. The beam flickered, flashed once, then guttered to a thin blue glow before dying completely. Ethan tried his flashlight. It buzzed faintly in his palm, then went dark. Nora gripped the whistle Ethan had given her earlier, raised it to her lips, and blew. No sound came out. The woods stole even that. The bulges pressed harder, the nylon strained, threads popped one by one with tiny snapping sounds. Then the first tier opened, a long, jagged line across the roof, spilling cold air inside. Another followed down the side, fabric splitting like skin. Nora screamed. And the forest screamed with her. Her voice multiplied, distorted, came back in a hurricane of sound, from behind, from the creek, from the tops of the trees. Hundreds of Noras wailing in perfect synchronization. Sam added his voice in terror. "Help us!" he cried. "Help us!" the forest begged back, dozens of Sams pleading in every direction. Ethan tried to hold it together, but the mimicry was relentless. He shouted, "Stop!" and the command came back 100-fold, so loud the nylon shook with the vibration. The tent collapsed inward, seams splitting, poles bending. Invisible weight crushed down from above, pressing them into their sleeping bags as though the forest itself were trying to smother them. Their screams merged with the mimicry until no one could tell which voices belonged to flesh and which to trees. The woods had become a hall of mirrors made of sound, every cry reflected and amplified, until all that remained was a storm of their own terror echoing into the night. Dawn came and went without them. The forest stayed hushed for days, its canopy locked in a kind of watchful stillness, as if waiting for permission to breathe again. When the rangers finally pushed through the undergrowth, they expected to find signs of a bear attack or a bad storm, but the camp looked almost ordinary at first glance. The fire pit still held a charred log smoldered down to ash, ringed by 2 camp chairs. In them sat Ethan and Nora, motionless, eyes glazed, unresponsive. They blinked when spoken to but said nothing, as if their minds had been left somewhere the rangers couldn't reach. Sam's tent was collapsed, poles snapped, fabric shredded by long tears. It looked like it had been clawed inward, though no animal tracks circled the site. And David's tent, the one nearest the tree line, was still standing. The zipper was drawn tight from the inside. When the rangers forced it open, they found no trace of him. Not a smear of blood, not a single footprint in the dirt. Just a strange orderliness, his sleeping bag folded into a perfect square, boots cleaned and placed side by side, clothes stacked in precise piles as though measured by a ruler. His journal lay open on his pack, its pages blank except for a single deep groove where someone had pressed a pen down hard without writing a word. The rangers exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. There was no one left to explain. As they packed up the abandoned camp, the forest seemed to exhale. First a sparrow trilled, then the faint hum of insects returned. The breeze carried the soft rustle of leaves overhead. Life, cautious but insistent, returned to the trees. And then, just as the last ranger turned to leave the clearing, a voice drifted out from the pines. "I'm here, don't leave me." It was David's voice, clear, familiar. The rangers froze. The voice came again, from farther off, then closer, then from every side at once. "I'm here, don't leave me." Each repetition multiplied until the forest itself seemed to chant with David's tone, dozens layered into one endless circling echo. The sound followed them down the trail, fading only when the trees grew thin and the first glimpse of the ranger trucks appeared through the brush. By then, the words had blurred into something less human, more like the forest itself had learned how to beg. And deep in Pine Hollow, where the tents once stood, the woods kept whispering, "I'm here, don't leave me." Over and over, forever waiting,